All right. So I'm actually here with Zeke Hernandez. It's quite a lengthy title, but I mean, it sort of tells you the prestige. Max and Bernice Garchick Family Presidential Associate Professor. And he's at Wharton University, Pennsylvania, for those of you who don't know. And I just wanted to welcome him on the platform. I've seen him and heard some of the ideas that he has, and he's just a cool dude. So welcome.
Thank you,
Appreciate
David.
that you're here. Yeah, yeah. So maybe we can start off with um, how did you get the idea of becoming a professor? Because I think I know a little bit of your history, but a lot of people would probably be interested in it, given that this is a bit of a global audience.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how far back you want to go. I'll try to maybe start with some more proximate things, and we can go further back. I think unlike a lot of people who end up doing having the kind of professor career that I have, my first love was for teaching as opposed to research, right? So a lot of people that end up getting PhDs, they did research with someone, or they were in a research lab or whatever, right? They were very good students, and then they want to keep doing research and get a PhD, and then they discover, oh, it turns out I have to teach as well. For me, it was kind of the opposite. I loved teaching. I'd had many opportunities to teach growing up in college. My part-time job was teaching Spanish because I'm a native Spanish speaker. And so I really like teaching, and I
And where
started.
did you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm from Uruguay, or Uruguay for those who's the way it's said in the United States, little country in South America. And my father was worked for a big multinational organization. So when I was young, he was transferred overseas to Central America. We spent a few years also in Argentina. And so I had spent time growing up in different countries, exposed to different cultures. And, you know, I guess because my father was involved in the world of international business broadly, that ended up also having a big effect on what I decided to study later when I got a PhD. But in some ways that was uh, second. Like I said before, teaching was the reason I wanted to get a doctorate and be a professor. In speaking with my professors, I discovered that it turns out that if you're going to get a PhD and be a professor, you have to do research. And then the question was, well,
Damn.
what do I want to research? What am I interested in? And that's when my upbringing came back to me, which was, well, in the world of business, I'm just really, perhaps because of how I grew up, really interested in people, managers, businesses, trying to figure out how to navigate a really complicated world and succeed and do business in international markets. And that's what shaped my research interests. Let me stop there. Feel free to follow up with anything you want me to go deeper into.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I mean, you kind of had a hint of why business. I mean, that seems weird. We hear, as particularly like when I was growing up, I grew up in a little dinky town in northern Ontario, and nobody really was interested in business, and let alone doing stuff related to research. It was all just like, hey, if you're going to do science, you do science.
Yeah.
I mean, are we doing science? How did you sort of pick that? And why wouldn't you just do a science career if you're doing what we're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, I guess I'll have to go back to the growing up formative experiences. So, um, even though it might sound otherwise because of the kind of career my father had, I do not come from a wealthy family. My parents came from very poor backgrounds, and eventually my father did get a good enough job that he worked for this multinational organization, but life was pretty precarious before that. for him and for our family. And then in those experiences living in countries like Guatemala, Costa Rica, Argentina, I saw a lot of poverty and misery in those growing up. And the contrast between that poverty and that misery and, the journey of my own parents who went from poverty to, not a lot of wealth, but, sufficient to make ends meet. And wondering, holy cow, like, I don't know, it was just all jarring to me. It was like, here are these people that I'm seeing in different countries who are so poor, and I'm seeing all the economic and political and social conditions that are keeping people down, and comparing that to some of the opportunities my parents had that I have had. All of that, I think, led me to being really interested in economic growth. What is it that produces economic growth and prosperity for people? And I had majored in business and in accounting in college, so I was kind of in that world. But if you're interested in economic growth, you can take 2 or 3 paths. One is to say, okay, I'll get a PhD in like something like economics, and I'll study how economies as a whole grow. Or I'll get a PhD in something like development and understand poverty, right? And what helps poor people or poor countries develop. But none of those 2 options weren't that interesting to me, because from what I had observed growing up, it wasn't like economic policy that brought people out of poverty. It was business, right? It was the fact that a business hired someone like my father and gave him a chance to move up the ladder, or it was entrepreneurs who started businesses. And so, in my lived experience, in some ways it was like studying poverty to understand how to get people out of poverty wasn't the way. It was like, it's business. It's these businesses that create jobs, that invest, that innovate. And so I know it seems a little bit convoluted, but in my mind, it was very clear that understanding how businesses work, how they perform, how they grow and expand and invest would help me understand economic prosperity and growth much more than studying economic prosperity and growth. If that makes sense. I guess that's, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the explanation I can give you.
Yeah, no, I'm just actually kind of curious what your, maybe don't take this the wrong way, but I'm just curious, like, what is your rules to riches in terms of, okay, if you were in that situation again, what would you tell people? What have you sort of learned about how do you move up from, moving social class, for example?
Yeah. Well, it's not what I've studied, so I don't know from an academic standpoint, right? I mean, I would say that based on what I've seen, there are, of course, the basics, right? Like, try to get an education, right? As much education as you can. That's probably the number one thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, some people are really poor because they can't stay healthy, right? Because they have childhood diseases, right? So there's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation trying to solve that. But I suppose that maybe my interests weren't in that. But I would say once someone has an education, then I would say business is not the only, but it's a very viable path out, right? Whether through entrepreneurship or through being able to work in a growing business. But I don't want to misstate what I do. So I don't study poverty or how to get out of poverty. I would say that was trying to understand economic growth as my motivation, but it's not necessarily what I do, right? What I really study is how businesses grow internationally and how the factors that help them succeed in international markets. And I also study what immigration has to do with that. That is how the movement of people affects the decisions and investments that firms make across countries. But again, that is not directly studying how to get out of poverty.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a difference between the motivation and what I study, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, but I think that those are like deeply intertwined often in terms of why you do things or try to figure things out, right? Like I mean, that's part of what this whole channel is sort of evolved around. It's like, hey, that first of all, everybody's completely normal, no matter, what you're sort of feeling or going through. But secondly, we can study all sorts of really interesting things. And third, sometimes it takes a lot of work. And to be okay with the fact that, yeah, you know what, it doesn't necessarily work out. But you don't quit with it. You just keep going and keep working at it. So tell me about this, like this transition over the years. Was it just education was the only thing that allowed you to get to where you are? And I'm sure that this has been a bit of a journey. I'm sure so at least with my family, it is kind of weird. None of my extended family, none of them went to, got an education and things like that, higher education.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is really weird. So I'm not sure if you want to speak to, what has your journey been like, how you sort of navigated getting to where you are. How do you navigate the stresses of where you are? Like, how do you feel good about yourself? I want to sort of see and think about, or I want to see how you're navigating this journey. If somebody else was, from another country, how would they get to where you are today?
Wow. Deep question, my friend. For me, it was primarily, again, in my case, it was very much a path of education. I think one of the most fortunate things that ever happened to me was when I was 4 years old, we moved overseas and I was able to go to a school where I learned English. Had that not happened, I would not be here today, right? There's no way I could have gotten an education in the United States. So, that was luck. I did nothing to merit that. That was, just luck that I had that opportunity. And credit to my parents for making it possible. But after that, then it was, because education had been really precious, my parents did not grow up with parents that were educated, and it was very hard for them to get an education. So I think in my family, it's not that my parents sat next to me doing my homework every day, but it was an unstated, obvious thing that education is really precious, that anyone who can get education it's a great privilege. And if you can, make the most of it. So I was a good student. I was a motivated student, allowed me to get good grades in, high school. Good enough that I was able to apply for and get a scholarship to come to college in the United States. And then, when I was here, I was very aware that that was a rare opportunity for someone with my background. So I worked really hard to do very well in school, which opened up doors to get a master's degree and, helped me develop relationships with professors who thought, hey, you're a promising student, you work very hard. Because I love teaching, that led to conversations about like, well, what does your career look like? Do you enjoy being a professor? Yes. Oh, you have to do research. Oh my gosh, what is that about? So I think just trying to be a really good student throughout my life kept opening doors for more and more education. I had mentors in college who helped me apply to graduate school, and I ended up at the University of Minnesota getting a PhD, and I tried to make the most out of that. So it was really, it's not that I knew from age 15 that I would end up doing this. It was more doing the very best with the opportunity right in front of me, because it was all I had, and just working hard and doing the very best I could. And that opened up more doors. And then once new doors opened, it was, all right, let's take the next step and do the very best I can with that opportunity. I'm as surprised as anyone that I've ended up at Wharton, and I've had a really great academic career, and much more than I ever expected. But it was about that. So yeah, very much an academic path for me, right? There was a moment, I will say one thing that I don't know if this helps anyone listening. In between a master's degree and a PhD, I wasn't 100% sure that I wanted to commit to 5 years of a PhD and an academic career. So I took a year, I took some time to work. I went and worked for a large technology firm just to be sure, like, do I really want to do this academic thing, or is there another path for me? And 1 year in the corporate world was enough to convince me that, yeah, I did not enjoy what I was doing in the corporate world. It was not creative enough. It wasn't intellectually interesting enough. So then I, went to do the PhD. What else do you want me to talk about? I feel like that was a long-winded answer I gave you.
That was awesome. No, I think that would help out a ton of people of thinking about this. I think too, one of the things that's really amazing, I think about like these opportunities that we never had when we were younger. I'm assuming that we're relatively similar in age. I was a 79 kid, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we live in a world that we have these amazing opportunities now to actually reach out and get to. I mean, this whole reciprocity project gets like hundreds of 100,000 views a month, and some of the folks, they're either older, some of the folks are in different countries. What would be kind of like a practical thing that you would say if I wanted to actually have an impact on my life next year or this year and have something to show for it? And what would that be, right? What is it that you can do that would have an instant impact on your life so that, maybe they don't, maybe they never become go into research or anything like that, but what is it that allows you to do a little bit better next year than this year?
Good question. I would say one is setting goals, right? Like if I don't know who's listening right now, but if I asked you, do you write down your goals, right? Do you set and write down goals? I would say most people, right? Most people do not. And so just being purposeful, write down a goal and work toward it. And, and then you apply the normal good rules of what a good goal is, right? It should be specific, measurable, something that is achievable, something that is, you set a deadline for it. So whether that goal is, I want to, I don't know, be healthier, right? And I don't know, lose X amount of weight, or whether that goal is, I want to, learn something new. So just, do you write it down, or are you going about doing what you've always done and expecting different results, right? You're not going to, in the spirit of your question, you're not going to achieve something different or accomplish something different if you keep doing the same things you're doing right now. And so I think the moment you define the goal and write it down and are purposeful about it, that will make a difference. But the other thing I want to say is that there's all kinds of goals that we could set up. And I think that most of us set goals that are pretty selfish in nature. They're about us, right? And I think that, to me, the biggest way that you can have an impact is to think of the value you can create for others and define the value you create in the world as a function of what you do for other people. That is, to me, the most direct way to feel good about what you're doing and to actually make a difference. And so I'll give you an example, since we're talking to people sort of involved in the research world. When I was in graduate school, it was that critical time choosing a dissertation topic, right? And that dissertation topic really defines your identity as a researcher, the kinds of jobs you're going to get, probably where you're going to work, etc. And I was torn between two topics. One topic was in I'm trying not to be too specific because not everyone listening is like a business in the world of business. But one topic was a very traditional business topic. It was in an area that was pretty commonly studied, and studying that topic, it was fairly predictable what that would do for my career, right? There was an established group of people working in that area. I kind of could easily envision where I would get a job studying that topic, and how much that job would pay, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was this other topic that was about like how immigrants affect business. That was a very unusual topic for someone in a business school. Like people in business schools, especially back then, did not really study immigration. But it was something I was very fascinated by, something that kept coming to my mind. But it was unusual. I was like, well, I don't know like what kinds of jobs. I don't know what studying this topic will do for me, was the point, right? How will it benefit me in my career path? And but I was interested in both, but I wasn't sure which one to do. And then I remember having a realization, and it was that, if I pursue that first topic, which is very predictable, but a lot of people are working in that topic space, it's not something that will make a big difference in the world. It won't create a great service to others because a lot of people are already working in that space. And it's a topic that would only be beneficial for businesses, but not for anyone else. Or I could focus on this issue having to do with immigration. And the world is very confused about immigration. There are big debates. There's a lot of unanswered questions on this topic. The world really needs more knowledge about this. And when I framed the decision not as what will this do for my career, but which of these two options will allow me to provide a better service to the world, that is, if I do it well, which one will make a bigger difference, a bigger dent in what people really need to know, it was very clear what I needed to do, right? It was like obvious that the topic on immigration, albeit unusual, albeit more uncertainty about my career, was the right thing to do. And that became the tiebreaker. And I pursued that topic. And, it's allowed me also to achieve a lot of personal success in ways that I didn't expect. But I don't measure the difference I'm making in the world by that. To me, the difference is I've been able to contribute to debates and discover new knowledge and communicate new knowledge in an area where the world really needs it. And so that's just one example of set goals and think about what you want to do and be purposeful, but define success by what it does for other people, not what it does just for you. And that's a much richer and positive way, and a much more direct way to feel like you've actually accomplished something worthwhile.
All right, so that is, I love that idea, but it's like so incredibly hard, right? Like for, even what you're doing right now is you're doing something. For those of you who don't know, the whole research path is that, taking some time to talk about this, there's no direct benefit. Like this seems very amorphous, maybe, like maybe in 10 years, somebody's going to come around and, it's going to benefit you somehow. But in general, it's not. So how do you reconcile? Is it just like, so from my perspective, I do a lot of things of like, hey, if I just feel like pleasure in this moment, I think that's okay. I think that is an evolutionary response, to sort of feel that this is good, and however good is defined. But how do you reconcile that? What's your guiding principles to sort of think about other people, or how do you reconcile these sort of challenges that we have, where we inevitably face multiple goals at once? What do you, what's your heuristic? Is it just you just do everything, which it seems like you're amazing at things, right? So how do you handle this?
No, no, you can't do everything. You can't do everything. I mean, I think that you can't do everything, but at the same time, um, if the objective function you're pursuing is only about benefiting yourself, um, it doesn't feel good. And so in some ways, it's almost like it's almost in your own self-interest, right? Not to be so selfish. That year I spent in the corporate world, you can ask my wife if you ever want to talk to her. I came home miserable every day because I felt like I was only doing this for a paycheck, right? That covered our expenses. And it was like, what is the point? Like there's nothing, like it's just so dead, right? And so there's a big difference between waking up every day, doing something because it's gonna pay you or whatever, than waking up and knowing that there's something that is helping someone else. And it might not be immediately visible. It might not be that, like a doc, I have friends who are doctors, and what they do like very visibly every day helps someone else. I'm not in that kind of profession, so I don't want to overstate. Like I don't want to come across as some saint who, it's not like what I do every second is saving the world. But generally, I believe that this enterprise that I'm in can make a difference if we produce useful knowledge, if we teach students and we're helping others accomplish their career goals, and that feels good. And so it's not that this doesn't help me, right? There's a difference in how I feel. And so I think part of the heuristic is, how does this make me feel? And that's, you could say, well, that's selfish, but it's it just feels better to know that you're helping others, to believe that you're helping others. And now you said also, do you do everything? Absolutely not, right? So I'm working on a very, very narrow set of issues. But they're the issues in which I have the expertise. So I think the rule of thumb is, does it help other people? And is it at the intersection? Does it also involve something that I can uniquely provide that very few others can, right? And so like what you're doing with reciprocity, there's, you've built a following and a platform and an influence that almost nobody can replicate, right? And so like you're creating unique value in ways that I can't, right? And so I'm tackling different issues having to do with business and immigration that you probably can't tackle, right? Or you have no interest in tackling. And so the heuristic is also like, if a lot of other people can do it, then it's probably not as much value added than if only you can do it.
So one I'm not sure how much influence is actually. It seems like it's very amorphous, but so that actually brings up the sort of thought that I was thinking about when you're talking about this, is that we face this real tension, that our work, my wife is in a healthcare. She's a healthcare professional, very similar to folks that are. I don't want to sort of tell what her profession is, but she sees a number of different clients every single day, and it seems like you make traction, right? With what we do, we read maybe a paper or two, we write a few things, and then it doesn't feel like we get a lot of traction. And in a lot of what I very openly talk about is the sort of reconciling of, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you delude yourself? I mean, other than there's this like overarching thing to delude yourself to get up and to do this and to enjoy it.
Yeah, it can be a slog for sure, right? Definitely the bigger purpose, right? Both what motivated me broadly to do this. So kind of the remembering where you came from helps a lot. And then also, yeah, what is but do you believe in the enterprise as a whole, right? Do you believe? So yeah, I mean, I'm writing this paragraph right now is probably not going to change the world, right? And it's a slog, and I have to write it for the 100th time, or doing this statistical analysis. Not none of those things individually are making the difference, but added up, right, over a career, over a lifetime, over multiple research studies, over multiple students you teach over a career, there is a difference that's made, right? And so I think you have to understand how the little day-to-day acts add up to something, and that's motivating. When I was starting graduate school, we had an introduction, and we had a professor who, very seasoned professor, who started listing all the hardships of doing academic work, right? All the rejection, the millions of times you would have to write and rewrite and redraft the same paper, all the negative feedback you get. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this doesn't sound very good, right? But he said something very wise. He said, look, if you're so obsessed about short-term outputs, right? If like all you care about is, okay, I finally got this paper published, or, I finally was able to teach this class, but you hate the process of it, this is not the career for you, right? And so he said, there's got to be something about the process itself of discovering and disseminating knowledge that you inherently love. And, it's not for everyone. I do think that it's actually, as we talk to people in academia, it's very important to say that, like, this is not a career for everyone. And if you realize early on that's not for you, my advice is get out quick. Don't escalate and stay, and 15 years in, then be like, okay, I really should have left. So when if a PhD student comes and says, a few months in, this is not for me, I'm like, great, we'll help you transition. So it's not for everyone, but if you enjoy coming up with new ideas, if you have the curiosity and the drive to really stick with something, that's enjoyable inherently. I don't know how else to say it. Maybe, the tongue-in-cheek way is like, if you're a nerd, you're a nerd, right? And, and it's good to know that about yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I mean, to clarify, do I enjoy getting rejected by a reviewer? No. Do I enjoy having to slog through the, 78th draft of the same paper? No, sometimes not. Like sometimes I do kind of, get sick of it, or, and I don't, I'm like, oh, that's, but I enjoy much more than I do not. And that ultimate goal, I do find very motivating, right? Like the high of, oh my gosh, this piece of knowledge didn't exist before and now it does because I stuck with this. That's kind of like a drug, it's very,
Yeah. Well, that's where I was going to go.
It's like a hit. It's a very motivating hit, oh, let me say one more thing. Working with others is very important, right? This profession can be super lonely. So, find people to go on the journey with you. So that's find good co-authors, find people who will, give you feedback and support you when you have a disappointment or a setback or a rejection. And so whether that's people who collaborate directly with you, or, for example, I have colleagues who have formed reading groups where they read each other's work and give each other feedback once a month, or having trusted others who will kind of be on the journey with you and help you out. That's fundamental, right? I mean, of all the things that I've published and written and worked on, very, very few are sole authored individual projects. Most of them are collaborative, and that helps a lot because you have each other to sustain you. You have someone that, when you're down, someone else encourages you. When your collaborators down, you encourage them. So I think that the social and human aspect of the profession is, I think, really critical too.
So I was wondering, it's it was almost like jumping in my head. I was like, how? Right? Like it seems easy on the outside, right? To sort of say, hey, just get networks or whatever. Like, how do
Yeah.
you what do you do? Right? So part of me, this is a bit of a pitch with the whole reciprocity project that I'm trying to do is mimic some of those things.
Yeah.
Um, and really, if we can come up with a technological solution to do this, I'm definitely going to be trying to do that as much as I possibly can. But how do you do this? What is one positive? And I think that's where I don't want to keep you too much longer, because I know that you have to go pretty soon. But what is one positive tip that you can do, that so we've tackled, what is one thing that somebody could do over the next year to make progress in their life? And I think that was a really good answer. And the next one is what do you do in terms of if you wanted to get into a profession like this, and it doesn't have to be research. I mean, this could be any profession. You could be going into Wall Street, and
Yeah.
you're in Sri Lanka right now. What do you do? How do you bridge that gap of making those connections?
If there's anyone in Sri Lanka right now who wants to go to Wall Street, I don't know that I have great advice for you. What do you do? Well, I think I'll go back to something I said earlier, not to be stubborn, but the first thing you do is you do the very best with what's in front of you, right? You perform very well, as best as you possibly can in what you're doing right now, because good performance opens up new opportunities, right? And creates a reputation for you. And so perform well in whatever is in front of you is very important, right? And that will kick off more opportunities, including opportunities to meet other people. You'll get noticed, right? By being noticed, right? You meet people, and that's networking. So I would say that's the most important thing, right? You can't be bad or mediocre at what you're doing right now and expect new opportunities to show up, right? It's or at least it's going to be much harder. The other thing is, you have to be a little bit shameless and just ask, like when you define, perhaps I'm now going back to another thing I said, which is, if you know what your purpose is, you know what the goal is, you've written it down, you've defined it, then that makes it clearer what kind of people you need to meet and get to know to get you there. And so, if you have a good local reputation in what you're doing, that will open doors. But then, I've been surprised throughout my career, really, at that most people are actually quite generous if you reach out to them, right? And you have to reach out in an effective way. So that is, you want to be brief, you want to be clear about what you want, you want to ask for something that they can reasonably do. But within those parameters, people are very generous. Maybe you don't start by, if you're the person in Sri Lanka emailing the CEO of Goldman Sachs and saying, I want to work for Goldman Sachs, obviously that's too much of a stretch, but within reason, asking for what you need in the next step. I think sometimes we're just too shy and too, we're not good at asking, and asking really matters.
So how do you become not shy? So for me, a huge part, because I was very, very introverted, very shy as a person. And like, please don't take this the wrong way, but part of me is learned to say, screw it. Just, so what? You do it and see what happens.
Yeah, some of it's like, you ask, what's the worst that can happen? Someone will say no, right? Like, that doesn't say anything about you. It's not gonna harm your reputation. Like, look, and it's also not just, you talked about being shy, but especially if this is an international audience, there's also significant cultural differences. So in Latin American culture, you don't really self-promote, right?
Canadian culture,
for example, I was like I said, I was a very good student, like in terms of my grades and all that, very good. But I was taught and brought up in a culture where you don't brag, you don't self-promote, you're never your own marketing department. you know, and that's something that I had to learn in the context of the United States, which is a culture where self-promotion is more accepted and often the only way you get things done. And I remember a professor kind of having to, not physically, but kind of shake me a little bit and be like, look, if you don't promote yourself, nobody will do it better than you, right? And so it's sometimes getting over the cultural barrier that leads you to think, you know, I have to be good and others will notice, right? And so a lot of it is just getting over that hang up. And, you know, you don't have to brag, but you have, you know, you reach out, you ask, you have to be, like you said, a little shameless and say, screw it. Like, what could be the worst thing that could happen, right? So for anyone here who is from a culture like the one I described growing up in, I see you, right? And I hear you, and I know it's hard. And I've learned now to do it, meaning to ask and you know, be explicit about what I want or what I need. But it's still not natural for me, but I've just learned to do it. Yeah.
I love that. I think that is a perfect spot to leave off, because I think that this is going to give a lot of inspiration to folks, hopefully for many, many years to come. And I deeply appreciate the fact that you came onto this channel and are participating in various different ways, giving back to the global community. So thank you so much, Zeke. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, David. I appreciate it. And to anyone watching, thank you for slogging through this, and I hope it's useful for you.